Hi, I'm Jack Howell. If you play the clarinet or oboe and you have wooden instruments, there's a pretty fair chance that either you've had an instrument crack or you're going to have an instrument crack at some point in the future. First, relax. They don't all crack, and it's not the end of the world if they do, but given the choice, we would naturally prefer that they don't, and that's why we're here. In this video, I'm going to talk about conditions that make an instrument cracking more or less likely, what we can do to mitigate the unfavorable conditions, and I'm going to show you how to make a relatively cheap humidity-controlled case. Relatively. Fortunately, because humans are comfortable at around 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% relative humidity, we tend to create an environment for ourselves, most of the time, that keeps our instruments comfortable too. This video is about the rest of the time. Unless, of course, you live in Phoenix or Calgary, in which case our rest of the time is your most of the time, and you've likely given up and gone to green lines. In Hawaii, you may have different problems. If you know all about temperature and humidity and you're just curious about the case, I'll timestamp it in the description. Onward. There is a scientific paper online called The Hygromechanical Properties of Grenadilla Wood that appeared in the journal Wood Science and Technology, and it talks about orthotropic elastic constants and water diffusion coefficients, and I could regurgitate some of that, but don't worry, I won't. However, there is a line between too much and not enough information. One winter, years ago, I had a student come into his lesson with an absolutely gaping crack in his A clarinet. Winter or not, I had never seen a crack like this. I asked if he had been humidifying his case, and he said, "Yes, of course." "With what?" I asked. And he showed me one of those green rubber snakes with little sponges inside that violinists use. And they put it in the F-hole. And I said, "Where'd you put it?" And he showed me how he had put it inside the top joint. That crack could have been avoided if he and I had had this little chat that you and I are having right now. So, why do clarinets crack? Because they can. Ted Owen used to say that if a clarinet cracked, it was because it wanted to. Wood, being a natural material, has variable grain and areas of greater and lesser strength. When we make it into a clarinet, we impose a shape and subject it to stresses that the wood totally did not expect when it was just standing there minding its own business, being an umpingo tree. If enough stress coincides with enough weakness, we get a crack. When a clarinet cracks, very often it is through a tone hole, partly because we made a weak spot by drilling a hole there, partly because that hole collected moisture, introducing local stress. Then the environment probably pushed it over the edge, but you never know for sure. When wood absorbs moisture, it swells. When it dries, it shrinks. This is an extremely powerful force. People used to split stone by drilling holes, then inserting tightly fit dry pegs, wooden pegs, and then pouring water on the pegs. The pegs would swell and split the stone. Grenadilla absorbs less water and thus swells and shrinks less than most types of wood, which is why we use it, but no wood is immune. And then there's temperature. All materials respond physically to changes in temperature. The number that describes this property is called the coefficient of expansion. A material with a high coefficient of expansion, say copper, will get larger as it warms and smaller as it cools than a material with a low one. Say grenadilla. Grenadilla's coefficient of expansion is relatively low, but it's not zero. So imagine a cross-section of a clarinet, which is a relatively thick-walled tube. We wish to minimize the difference in both temperature and moisture content between the inside and the outside of the tube. If the outside of the tube becomes either much drier or colder than the inside of the tube, the outside will shrink. and restrained by the warmer, wetter inside is likely to crack. Incidentally, this is why you should swab wooden instruments fairly frequently. So keeping the outside and the inside of the tube as nearly equal as possible in both temperature and moisture level is easier in the summer when it's warm and humid, at least here where I live. Although I do remember one summer when we played a tour send-off concert in the evening. But that day the hall had been rented out in the afternoon for a hip-hop concert, and they had cranked the air conditioning. We had to play the concert. As we played the concert, the warm instruments in a freezing hall, 2 clarinets and 2 oboes cracked. That was a pretty vivid demonstration. I've only had instruments crack during the summer twice, once because of extreme air conditioning, and once playing an outdoor concert in Crested Butte, Colorado, when the sun went down and the temperature dropped below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. So, temperature. If you come in from your commute and your clarinet is cold, don't blow into it to warm it up. Warm it up with your hands, stick it under your coat, stick the joints under your arms, or if the room's warm, just set it out on the stand and have a cup of coffee. So, temperature, that's the easy one. We can feel it. Ooh, it's cold. Dryness isn't quite as noticeable, but it's a big reason why winter is tough. Atmospheric temperature and humidity are inversely proportional. As temperature goes up, relative humidity goes down. If we're in Fahrenheit, relative humidity changes about 2.2% per degree of temperature. For Celsius, it's about 5%. So let's say the outside air is 40 degrees Fahrenheit and 60% relative humidity. By the time our central heating raises the temperature to 70 degrees, and in an increase of 30 degrees, the air is practically bone dry. And if the air outside gets cold enough that the moisture in it freezes and precipitates out, it's even drier. Now, does that mean that the air in your house or concert hall is 0% relative humidity? No, probably not. It's humans, people, plants, plumbing, create some moisture. It's probably more like 25 or 35%, but that's still not great for your clarinet. So, what to do? We can't always control the room, or do we always need to, but we can control our clarinet case. No matter how much you play, your clarinet spends more time in its case than out of it. Or should do, anyway. If you leave your clarinet out on a stand all winter, I'd call that a risk factor on several levels. Anyway, winter is tough. The room is poorly heated, it's cold, that's a risk. If it's heated, it's probably dry, and that's a risk. So, you do your best, then try not to worry about it. The old school solution is to put some orange peels in your case during the winter. I'm all for old school in some things, but today we have 2 things that they didn't have 50 years ago. We have humidipacks, which regulate relative humidity, and we have small, cheap hygrometers, which measure it. There's a saying in business, that which gets measured gets managed. So the first thing you do is get a hygrometer. There's a D'Addario, hang on just a second. Yeah, don't forget your props, Jack. So here's a D'Addario hygrometer. They street for about $20. They seem to work really pretty well. That one's just been in my hand, so it reads 64%, 73 degrees Fahrenheit. This one I just took out of a case, and it measures 58, 71.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The D'Addario streets for about $20. This one cost $1.50. I got a 10-pack of them on Amazon, not on Amazon, on eBay, so I could give them to my students. And D'Addario seems to maybe be a little more precise. When I put 2 of them together, they're almost always either exactly the same or within 1% of each other. The eBay ones are maybe 1% or 2 more variable, but come on, $1.50. The batteries are probably the most valuable part. That's the first step. Get a hygrometer and learn what environment your clarinet sleeps in. If you don't measure, you don't know. If you open your case in the morning and it's between 50 and 60% relative humidity and the temperature is around 70 degrees, you're good. If your environment isn't too dry, if you're playing every day and your case seals at all, just the residual moisture in the bore and your swab may do the trick. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If it's lower than that, you might want to add some humidification. I put 50% D'Addario humid packs in all my cases. These pouches are made of a vapor permeable membrane, maybe think like Gore-Tex, only cheaper, filled with a silica gel that's formulated for a specific relative humidity. And they come in like, I don't know, 10 or 12 different humidity points from 32 to, 80 something percent. So 50%, that's a nice round number. It's a good place for clarinets to live. If the relative humidity is higher than that point, the gel pack absorbs moisture and lowers the humidity in the case. Below that point, it releases moisture and raises humidity. I think Boveda manufactures all of these kinds of pouches. For reeds, I use the 65%. I get those directly from Boveda. For instruments, I use the bigger 50% ones, and I get those from D'Addario. Given a sufficiently hermetically sealed case, they work really well. But there are two ways that they might not work for you. One way is that there's no room in your case for one. The other way is that your case doesn't seal, so the humidipack doesn't do any good. The first failure mode is pretty obvious. The second, well, that's why you have a hygrometer. Today it's 78 Fahrenheit outside and 50% humidity. 68 and 55 inside my house. Any case would do. Now, I expect the situation in February to be very different. So, just quick review. Let's go through the flow chart. Put a hygrometer in your case. If it reads between 50 and 60%, do nothing. If it's lower, put in a humidipack if there's room. If you have a briefcase style case, like this one, that my first set of Yamaha clarinets came in, there'll be room. Plenty of room. If you have something like a BAM trekking or a Marcus Bona MB, there'll be room. And if that raises the relative humidity to 50%, chances are it will, you're fine. But if it's really dry, or if it's pretty dry and your case doesn't seal, the humidipack won't help. Okay, so if there isn't room in your case for the humidipack, or the relative humidity didn't increase it enough, and you're concerned, not everybody's concerned, you may be looking for a new case. Of course, there are all kinds of solutions. You could store your case in a plastic bag or something like that with a humidipack. And if you don't need to do it for very much of the year, that might be a good way to go. But let's say that you're going with the new case. There are lots of options. I'm just going to tell you what I do. Especially in the winter, I use clarinet cases based on Pelican hard plastic cases. The two sizes we're interested in are the 1470 and the 1490. The 1470 is about the size of a regular pochette case, and I'm just going to put up a picture of the 4 different cases from small to large. With the 1470, like the buffet pochette case, you have to leave the bells attached. The 1490 is a little bigger than the standard attaché case. Maybe you would call it quite a bit bigger. You can put a set of clarinets in with the bells detached, or you can make it into a triple case with E-flat. I also have a triple case based on the 1490 from Lomax Classics. I like it, and I recommend Lomax cases in general. The layout is thoughtful, the warranty is good, and it's the kind of small business I like to support. The cost is comparable to other quality commercial cases. The advantage of Pelican cases is that they are completely watertight, thus ideal for humidity control, and they're indestructible. In some other respects, they're the opposite of what we want in a case, namely small and light. They are hella heavy, especially the 1490. Sometimes that's a drag, like when the case tumbles out of an overhead luggage rack and the case cover handle freakishly twists around your pinky. On the other hand, your clarinets can fall 12 feet from the overhead rack to the bottom of the bus stairwell, only slightly restrained by your pinky ligaments, and they'll be completely unharmed. If there were a slightly less indestructible but lighter case that was still watertight, that would be great and probably expensive. But you have to pick your poison. If you don't have to walk long distances, the Pelican's weight is manageable, particularly the 1470. It's not bad at all. If you have to walk long distances, at least you don't have to worry about getting caught in a downpour. And if for some reason you have no choice but to put your horns under the plane, relax. This case will protect your clarinets from anything short of small arms fire. In short, if you need the humidity control and you're okay with the weight, the Lomax is an excellent choice. However, let's say you're like most of my students and you're fresh out of $400 bills. The Pelican case on which the Lomax is based is less than $200 new. And there are much less expensive knockoffs that are probably just fine. In fact, I have an $80 Gator case that I'm going to make into a single case. Maybe I'll show that. So if you find an appropriately sized case from Gator or Vivor or Harbor Freight, you could have a case for well under $100. You might also find a used Pelican on eBay or something and buy a replacement foam insert set. All three of the foam insert pieces from Pelican cost about $40, but there are cheap knockoffs of those too. In fact, the foam that I'm going to use to show you how to make a 1470 double case, that was it's a cheap knockoff. So the disadvantage of foam is that it will never look as nice as a commercial foam, as a commercial case. The foam will break down eventually. That's an important distinction. The homemade case is cheap and functional. If you have money and or you care about how it looks, you'll want commercial. But speaking of functional, in a foam case you can lay things out however you want. And you can replace the middle foam insert for $25. And by the time you need to replace it, you'll probably want to try a different layout anyway. So, okay, one way or another, you've wound up with a hard case that seals watertight, and it has a pick and pluck foam insert. And by pick and pluck, I mean that the foam is already sort of diced into these little squares, and you make the pockets by separating and pulling out those squares. So I'm going to show you how easy it is to cut the foam for a 1470. So we're going to move the camera so you can look over my shoulder. The foam in this case still works, but I put the barrel in the wrong place here, and it kind of bugs me, and so it's okay. But I want to change the layout. I want to space the joints just a little bit more, and make a video. So the first thing to do, and you can see where I have the humidipack. The first thing to do is to space the joints out so that nothing runs into the edge and so that nothing runs into each other. So I want there to be at least one row of foam between the bell here, and I want at least one row of foam here. So that will dictate where the center of this joint goes. And we're going to say it's right about there. So we're going to remove the foam from right here to right here. And there are two ways you can do this. I'm going to use a this knife, little utility knife blade, to do it. All right. So there are two ways to do this. Either you can kind of separate the foam bits only as deeply as you want the joints to sit, and then kind of cut from the side. Or you can cut all the way through, pull the piece out, and trim it. And that's what I'm going to do here. So let's remember, we're going here to here. Okay. So the second way, let's see if we still like this. And that there. Yep, I think that's where I want to do it. So the first thing I do, and I'm going to do it the second way, which is to remove a rectangle of foam all the way through like a plug, and then I'm going to trim that to control the depth that the joint sits. Now, for the joints and for the mouthpieces, I remove a row of 3 squares. Now the squares are 1 centimeter square. And if you think that's a communist plot, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. I guess you're going to have to throw away all your 65 and 66 millimeter barrels. But that's what they are. If it's any comfort to you, the ones in the bigger cases, like the 1450, whatever it is, the camera cases, the deeper ones, those ones are a 1/2 inch. But these are 1 centimeter. I trust I can speed this up editing. Okay, so we wanted that to go. Let's remember where we wanted it to go. We wanted that to go within 2. Okay. Now the good thing about this is that if you totally screw it up, it only costs you 25 bucks. You can order another insert and you'll be fine. Okay. So see how we're just pulling these little partitions between the foam fingers? We're just pulling those apart. And you do want to go all the way down to the bottom so that you don't inadvertently pull out foam fingers that you don't want to remove. Okay. There. Now we have a slot, which is where our joint is going to go. And so we want it to sit. We want it to sit almost all the way down in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim just this much of the foam, and I'm going to replace it. Is that still on camera? There we go. Okay. Ordinarily I would do this on a workbench or something so I don't risk cutting through my brand new foam, but I'm making a video. Okay. So, and then to make it even cleaner, I'm going to turn it over so that the unmolested side is up. All right. So that goes back in. There, we have a nice neat slot. Now we have to trim away stuff so that nothing pushes and the bell goes in. So what I do is I figure out where the end of the bell is, Typically it's 3 squares out. And those 3 fingers I remove entirely. Okay, so now we have that. That's where the bell goes. That looks good. Now we take our our razor and we trim a V so that the bell sits down inside. And I'm doing this in a little bit of a hurry, so it might be jankier than usual. And then this will need to be trimmed just a little bit. There. Now the case fits. Now the clarinet fits in there pretty well. Yeah, I'm happy with that. But we don't want foam pushing on things. So we go around in places where there are keys. We take our knife, we look for these little impressions. So for instance, like these posts made an impression right here. So I'm going to take these 2 and I'm just going to nip them out. There, that looks good. Now these keys right here, we don't want those pushing down on top. So we're going to cut a little home for them. There, that looks good. We don't want foam pushing on these pads, so we note where they are, and we do the same thing that we did with the foam on the posts. We just pull out the little fingers and we nibble it off. Here, this one, I think we want to take these 2. Boy, I hope my head's not in the way. Why didn't somebody say something? That one's good. This one, these 2. And what you'll do is when you start using the case, you'll look for impressions. You'll look for places where the keys made impressions in the foam, and then you can just trim it off. That was pretty good. We need to give some relief for this sliver key. So let's take this and trim that a bit. That's good. And I could do more, but you know, we're not going to be here all day. So I'm going to do the rest of it without talking too much, and with any luck at all, I'll be able to figure out how to speed it up in editing. So now I'm realizing that I could have done a better job with this in some respects. If now that I see, I could have moved this one more square this way and still had plenty of clearance, and then had a little bit more room for my mouthpiece. So a word of explanation about the barrels and the mouthpieces. If I were playing freelance gigs, I would, like in my previous case, I would have space for 2 or 3 barrels and a couple of mouthpieces. But because I have a locker and it's full of barrels and mouthpieces, I only really need 1 barrel and 1 mouthpiece. If I need something else at the hall, I can go get it. So I'm going to take a second, I'm going to think about this and figure out exactly where I want to put the rest of these bits. Again, if I were to do this again, and I probably will, I would move this joint. No, I would leave it right where it is because I don't want less space between these keys. I don't want less foam here. I don't want less foam here. The only thing I might change is I might move this joint down just a little bit. That probably would have been the best compromise. But anyway, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to figure out what I'm going to do, and I'll bring you back when I've had a think about it. And okay, we're back. I'll show you my solution, and I'm not entirely thrilled with it. I put the mouthpiece here. It works best with this if you're perfectly horizontal and you follow the lines. And yeah, I would probably do it a little bit differently. But the main point of this case insert was actually to make a video, and I think you can see how it's done. I don't worry too much about things that poke out like this, like the thumb rest. They will make their own impression in the case. You don't need to cut out pockets for those. You mostly need to cut out pockets for things that are delicate. And I don't think that the foam ever would exert enough pressure to bend a key. The foam is very compliant, but I don't want to have foam pushing on pads or rubbing on things. So that's where the mouthpiece is. I may do something different in the future, but I'm going to try this for now. And about barrels. Barrels, you could lay them this way. That would be just fine. You have more space for them, and I don't think it hurts anything to put them vertically. So that's what I do. And what I will do is I will put the barrel for the A here, and I'll put the B flat here, and then I'll have a little spot for a hygrometer either here or here. So for the barrels, I just do a square. That is 3 squares on a side. That's for soprano barrels. For E flat barrels, it works better for 2. And you could do it 2 squares on a side for soprano barrels and shove it in there, but I think this works fine. So you just remove that plug, and in goes your barrel, and remove. You probably saw earlier that I made a mistake. I'm sure I would never have made if I weren't on camera. Is that I mistakenly grabbed my A upper joint to try and fit this. So I wound up cutting out or pulling out an extra row of foam. And if that happens, don't worry about it. It's not going anywhere. It won't hurt a thing. And if it really bugs you, you can glue it back in. You have to make sure you use an adhesive that doesn't melt the foam. Ask me how I know. But you know, you can use like a white glue will work just fine, and you can glue it back in. And if it really bugs you, buy a new insert. And as you see, this whole thing, I'm not sure exactly how it took, maybe 10-15 minutes. I'll have to look at the camera. I'm going to put I'm going to put a hole for cork grease. Maybe I'll put that over here. A lot of times I'll make a slot and put a screwdriver someplace like this. And let's see, where do we want to put this? We're going to put it, actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to use this little one. And we're going to see how this works. Okay? I'm just going to pop this in right here. And I'm not going to go all the way down with this. I'm just going to make a little spot for it and then trim it out. This would be the method you would use if you did that former method, the one I was telling you about, where you don't cut all the way through. You just go down as far as you need, and then you just nip it out. And there you go. There's your hygrometer. The humidipack is underneath. You could do 2, you could do 4, you could do however many you wanted or you needed, and Bob's your uncle. There's the case. So one might argue that having the humidipack in a screened pouch with the airspace around the joints like the Lomax case does is best. I certainly wouldn't disagree. But in my homemade cases, I find that the hygrometer reads the same no matter where I put the humidipack or where I put the hygrometer. One might also argue that the foam interior of the homemade case provides better insulation when you have to be outside in the cold than the empty airspace does. But if you're outside long enough, your clarinets will get cold no matter what. Lomax does sell case covers with battery-powered electric blankets inside. If your environment and your commute requires it, sure. Otherwise, I would just get an Altieri case cover. Altieri and Lomax case covers are about equal in price and quality, but the Altieri works better for me ergonomically, mainly because the Lomax has no horizontal handle. When you close your case, where do you naturally pick it up? You pick it right there in the middle, where it faces you. The Lomax backpack straps are also on the wrong end for me because I carry on my right shoulder, but that's related to the lack of central horizontal handle. I'm used to zipping the cover, picking it up by the middle, slinging it over my shoulder. But that's just me. I'm only mentioning it in case you're like me. There you go. I'm not promising that if you do what I do, your clarinet will not crack, but I think doing something to regulate humidity in your case, at least during the times of year when it's a potential problem, makes sense. Control what you can, then don't worry about it. Go get them.